They took my brother!
Tell me everything.
They took my brother. The words cut through the five-star silence of Goldvine Tower, the most upscale rooftop restaurant in downtown Atlanta. People stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The crystal glasses on the marble tables trembled a little. A tiny black girl stood at the door, soaking wet from head to toe. No shoes. Knees hurt. The rain made her little cotton garment stick to her skin. Her hair was stuck to her forehead, but it was her voice, high-pitched, shaky, and desperate, that broke everything. They took my brother, she said again, this time more softly. A hostess ran up to her, almost like a prayer. One of the customers gasped. Some people whispered, not out of worry but out of annoyance. What was she doing here? Where was the security? Could someone please just relocate her? But the girl stayed still. Her feet were firmly anchored. Her eyes moved over the room until they landed on a man sitting at the biggest table in the middle of the room. It was Miles Harrow, the wealthy CEO of Harrow Tech, who was having dinner with his shareholders. He saw her, and he stopped. That face, he knew it. That same little girl had given him a wilting flower outside the service elevator 3 weeks ago while he was leaving a board meeting. "You seem sad," she replied. Maybe this will help. And now she was here. Tears, begging. Everyone else recognized a problem. He sensed a tale starting. It wasn't just about a boy who was missing. It was about a system that loses track of kids like him all the time. A mother who works 2 jobs and still feels like she doesn't belong. A small girl who had the guts to ask for aid in a place where she wasn't allowed to speak out. This was a black story, and what happened next would question everything: privilege, silence, and justice. You're watching Hidden Worth, where the voices that are frequently disregarded finally be heard. If this resonates with you, click the subscribe button. This time, we're not going to be silent. Miles Harrow stood totally still as the room sank back into its polished hush. The little girl's cry echoed in his chest, like a sound he hadn't heard in years, one he had buried beneath boardrooms, stock prices, and layers of expensive suits. Because once upon a time, he had cried like that too. Long before the tailored jackets and televised interviews, Miles was just another kid on the forgotten side of Baltimore. He had lived in a group home with broken windows and peeling paint as a child. When he was 6, his mother took too many drugs. His father, if he could even be called that, had disappeared before he could remember what he looked like. He spent evenings staring at the ceiling and listening to sirens outside his window. He was hungry. He felt ashamed. He knew what it was like to be ignored and seen as a nuisance, a burden, or even worse. No one ever sought for him when he got missing. No one ever stood up at a beautiful dinner and said, "That boy matters." So Miles learned how to disappear, but he also learned how to fight. He got a scholarship that got him out by the time he was 16. He was on the cover of Forbes when he was 28. A black man who was different from the rest, a whiz with technology, a troublemaker. But even now, in this fancy restaurant he partly owned, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's rent, he still felt like a boy, hungry, cold, and alone. When he saw Amara, shaking in the doorway with the same fear in her eyes, it was like time folded over itself. The room didn't matter. It didn't matter who the guests were. The business didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was a promise he made to himself a long time ago, when he was a kid and had one of the worst nights of his life. He had curled up in a corner of the group home and said, "If I ever get out of this, I won't forget the ones who are still stuck," Miles said. At first it was quiet, then it got louder. He walked straight toward Amara, past the stunned waiters and the judgmental stares. When he knelt down next to her and put a gentle hand on her shaking shoulder, he wasn't just a billionaire CEO. He was a boy who remembered what it was like to be invisible, and he didn't want this little girl's voice to go unheard. While the eyes of Goldvine Tower turned toward the little girl in the doorway, no one thought to look beyond her to the woman who had spent nearly a decade behind its kitchen doors. Her name was Marlene. To most of the staff, she was just that quiet black lady from prep. To the managers, she was the one who never spoke up, never caused trouble, and always stayed late without asking for overtime. She kept her head down, wore simple shoes, and wrapped her hair back tightly. Not because she didn't have pride, but because the world had taught her early on that black women like her were easier to get rid of when they were quiet and dangerous when they weren't. Every morning, at 5:45 a.m., Marlene came in through the service entrance, sharp. It didn't matter if it was raining, snowing, or a holiday. She washed dishes, cleaned up messes that no one else would, and prepared veggies. She knew every crack in the floor and every problem with the fryer. But no one ever asked how she was doing. People just called her M, or the shadow in the back. They didn't even know her last name. But Marlene didn't mind. She had to feed her kids and pay her rent, which didn't wait for fairness. Dwayne, her son, was 14 and very good with computers. Amara, her kid, was always asking questions and laughing. Marlene worked because she couldn't quit, not for a black single mother trying to support her family in a city that never looked back. But sometimes, late at night when the restaurant was dark and the prep sink was quiet, she would stop. For a moment, she would glance out the broken kitchen window at the skyline and say, "One day, they'll see me." But no one ever did, not even the guests who drank $80 wine. Not the people who owned the house who snapped their fingers when the cooking was too slow, and definitely not the executives who only ate together once a quarter and never left the swinging doors. Until now. Until her daughter ran into the dining room, barefoot and crying. Now, Marlene's world, the one she fought so hard to keep together, was colliding with the one that had always pretended she didn't exist. And somewhere inside, a fear greater than any unpaid bill or late-night shift was rising. Because if the world didn't see her, how could it possibly care about her children? Marlene didn't know it yet, but things were about to get quite different. And this time, she wouldn't be invisible anymore. As soon as Amara fell into Miles Harrow's arms, her tiny fists gripping the sleeves of his $1,000 suit, something in him clicked into motion faster than logic, deeper than instinct. He didn't wait for protocol. He turned to his head of security, a former Marine named Taylor, and said only 2 words: "Find him." Taylor nodded without question. Miles's orders were not suggestions. Marlene, on the other hand, was stopped in the hallway just outside the kitchen, still in her apron, her hands covered in flour and panic. She heard the noise and knew right away that it was her daughter's voice. But now she was looking at Miles, not sure if this was help or simply another false hope. "Tell me everything," Miles continued in a calm but eager voice. "Start from this morning," Marlene said through tears and a shaky voice. Dwayne had left home at 7:30 a.m. for class. He always took the same route, cutting through Holloway Park to get there faster. But he never made it today. A teacher called to see whether he was sick. No, he wasn't. She called the police since he was missing. "They told me kids go missing all the time," she responded. "Maybe he just ran away. Boys his age do that." But Dwayne isn't like that. He isn't careless. He's smart. He's always checking in. Miles clenched his jaw. He had heard this before. The system doesn't care when black kids go missing, calls them troubled or runaways. The system saves the report, but it doesn't put the search first. It was the kind of indifference that killed people. Not today. He took out his phone and phoned his own private investigation team. Not bodyguards. Full coverage, he added. Not PR. Real field operatives. "I want film from traffic cams, doorbell cams within 2 miles, and any pings from his phone, bike, or watches. Get a description, a timestamp, and track if anyone saw him." Then he went back to Marlene and asked, "What color was his hoodie?" "Gray," he said, "with red sleeves. School logo right here." She replied, patting her chest. "And his shoes?" "Old white Nikes. The soles are coming apart." That was all it took. Miles didn't say it out loud, but he understood this. The system had already let Dwayne down. If anything was going to happen now, it would have to come from outside it. And he wouldn't stop until that boy came home. Miles had lived through that silence once, and he wasn't going to let another kid get lost in it. The sun had set behind Atlanta's skyline, casting long shadows over neighborhoods the city had forgotten. Sidewalks that are broken, streetlights that blink. The wind blew fast food wrappers around. Travel books didn't show this image of the city. But here, in front of peeling row houses and corner stores with bars on the windows, was where the first clue came up. Miles' private crew had been working non-stop. Drones are flying around. Access to the traffic camera has been authorized. The phones rang, but there was still no sign of Dwayne. Not until a field investigator called Lex got a call from a tip line they had set up just a few hours earlier. An older man, Mr. Harris, who works for a grocery delivery app, had seen something. "I didn't think anything of it at the time," he claimed, "but now, I remember that boy." Lex wanted to know more. Mr. Harris said he had been delivering to an apartment building off Bellevue Avenue, which is a neighborhood where most landlords stopped caring a long time ago. He saw a black SUV parked in a strange way on the pavement while he was waiting for a customer to buzz him in. Windows that are tinted. The engine started, and then he noticed the kid. Looked scared. A gray hoodie with red sleeves. He tried to turn around, but someone rushed up behind him and pushed him inside. Harris yelled and stepped closer, but the SUV raced away. He didn't see the license plate. A piece of tape was on it. He thought there was a custody issue at the time, maybe a parent was just being mean. He didn't call the police. Didn't want to get involved, he said. Lex wrote down every word. Miles listened to the report from the back seat of a black Suburban parked 2 streets away from the same complex. He looked out the window with his fists clenched. The SUV wasn't by chance. It was planned out. Plates that were covered, vehicle without markings. It was a quiet neighborhood where police didn't often patrol and people kept to themselves. The individuals who took Dwayne knew where to look for him without being noticed. They were smart and planned, but they didn't expect someone like Miles to be watching. As the squad spread out to search the area, Miles couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Why Dwayne? He wasn't just a random target. This didn't feel right. It wasn't just a kidnapping, it was personal. Someone out there knew more than they were saying. The streets may have been quiet, but the shadows were hiding secrets. Miles was ready to pull every last one of them into the light. The black SUV rolled slowly down Bellevue Avenue, but Miles wasn't looking at the buildings around him. He was looking through time. It had been over 20 years since he had walked these streets. Back then, he wasn't he wasn't Hero, CEO, or billionaire. He was just Miles. A thin youngster with footwear that had been passed down to him and a lot of bruises he didn't talk about. These blocks weren't just made of concrete and graffiti. They were a way to stay alive. Every shortcut came with a price. There were threads on every smile. He saw the shattered fence outside the community center and knew that every corner was a test of who you were prepared to become to survive alive. He had leaped at once to get away from a child with a brick. The crooked stop sign is still on the corner. The same corner store with the metal gate that shook at night like a warning. And suddenly there it was. The old row house. The yellow paint is now dingy and chipped. The ceiling is drooping like a worn back. Miles had spent 6 long, shapeless years in this group home. No heat in the winter. No air in the summer. But there were a lot of other boys like him. Angry, forgotten, and hungry for love. One of them was named Aaron. They used to sleep in the same bed. He learned how to tie a tie from a YouTube video that Aaron showed him. That was the first time Miles had felt he might be able to do more than just be a number. He thought about banging on the door, but it didn't matter now. Last year, the place was condemned. He sat on the curb for a time, but something about standing there made his lungs seem heavier. He used to sit there after school, hoping anyone would drive by and take him somewhere else. No one ever did. The only person who ever looked out for him back then was Geneva, the old woman who owned the small food pantry down the street. She didn't have a lot, but she donated what she could. Food, heat, a kind phrase when no one else did, so he went to her. She still lived there, same place, steps that are still chipped. But now she was in a wheelchair, her eyes were dimmer, and her voice was weaker. When she saw him, she smiled as if she had been waiting for him the whole time. "I always knew you'd come back," she said. He sat next to her and questioned, "Why does it feel like nothing has changed?" She didn't think twice. Because for kids like you, like Dwayne, not enough people fight to change it. That's when he understood he wasn't simply seeking for a lost boy. He was chasing justice for every kid who had ever been left behind, including the one he used to be. It all started with a glitch. One of Miles's cyber investigators found a little but strange data trail. A device, Dwayne's old smartwatch, which was assumed to be offline, pinged for only 3 seconds on a private network before disappearing again. That network was registered to a warehouse that a shell business rented. The shell company? Preston Industries owned it. Miles's blood turned cold. Just the name Preston brought weight. Charles Preston was more than just a business competitor. He was a legacy player. A man who was born into riches and privilege, and a symbol of everything Miles had worked so hard to get past. Their businesses had fought over bids, patents, and races to come up with new ideas. But behind the scenes, Preston had always acted dirty, lobbying politicians, crushing whistleblowers, and manipulating journalists. But this was different. This was personal. Dwayne had no reason to be on Preston's radar, unless he witnessed something. Lex, Miles's best investigator, looked deeper into something he shouldn't have. They identified a complaint of a security breach that had been lodged at Harrowtech just 2 weeks before. A little data leak happened on a public school computer. At the time, nothing was detected. But do you know who was at the school's tech lab that week? Dwayne. He wasn't hacking anything, just looking around. A talented child who likes to experiment with systems. He might have found a back door, which is a link between Preston's servers and something hidden deep in encrypted code. That meant one thing. Dwayne saw something that Preston couldn't afford to lose. Proof of fraud, cleaning, or worse. Whatever it was, it scared Preston enough to keep a youngster quiet. Miles walked around his office with his fists clenched. He didn't see himself as a CEO anymore. He saw himself as a man back in that group home, watching another youngster vanish into a system that didn't care. But now he had power. And Preston had made a mistake by coming after someone he was watching. This isn't about rivalry anymore. Miles said, Lex, it's war. The next step wouldn't be through attorneys or news conferences. It would be through the truth. Being seen. And if Preston felt for even a second that the life of a small black boy didn't count, he was about to find out how wrong he was. Miles wasn't just going to bring Dwayne back, he was going to burn the whole line down to get him. The meeting wasn't planned. That made it more risky. Charles Preston didn't call. He didn't write an email. He just turned up at the Harrowtech executive parking deck in a silver Bentley, like a bad guy entering into a place he believed he already owned. Miles waited at the edge of the concrete ramp with his arms crossed and his jaw set. Preston stepped out carefully, and the sound of his polished shoes clicking against the pavement filled the air. A tailored suit, a vintage watch, and a smug look on his face. You're stirring the pot, Miles, Preston observed effortlessly, as if they were old friends talking about stock prices over drinks. I'm looking for a kidnapped boy, Miles responded in a flat voice. Is it making you angry? Preston laughed half-heartedly. Come on, you're a brilliant guy. You know that systems may be very fragile. If you poke them too hard, they break. Sometimes people get cut, but Miles didn't flinch. You threatening a kid now? Preston moved a little closer and spoke in a lower voice. You don't know what you're getting into. You really think this is just one child and one case? This is a very fragile equilibrium. And when people like you go digging in places you don't belong, he leaned closer. You risk losing everything you've built. It wasn't just being arrogant, it was feeling entitled. The kind that comes from generations of people in authority who never have to answer for their actions. The kind that thought some lives were not worth saving, especially black ones from regions no one wanted to go to. Miles glanced at him. All this money, all of this history. You think I won't tell everyone what I found? He replied. And you're still a coward. Preston smirked. Do you really think anyone will believe you? Do you think your board will support a scandal? Do you honestly think the press cares more about a poor black adolescent than stories about insider trading and data leaks? He stopped. Be careful, Miles. You can't win every war. You just survive. Then he turned around and walked back to his car, looking suave as ever. The Bentley roared to life and sped down the ramp, but Miles didn't move. His heart raced not from fear, but from fire. He had seen enough men like Preston win in silence. Not this time. Preston had tried to scare the wrong man, and if he thought Miles would back down, he clearly forgot who Miles used to be. Miles had built companies on data patterns, evidence, and hard logic. But what really broke the case wide open came from an 8-year-old girl with a crayon. Amara had been staying at Harrow's penthouse for 2 days while her mother worked with the police. Not because I felt sorry for them. Miles wanted her to be safe and close. She was too smart and too sharp to be missed in this search. That morning, while the adults looked at maps and security footage, Amara sat quietly at the kitchen island and drew. At first, it looked like any other child's drawing: crooked buildings, stick figures, and squiggles that were supposed to be cars. But then Miles saw something, a strange square with a jagged edge and numbers inside. Next to it, she had drawn a dark building with no windows and enormous black figures that she called trucks. "What's this?" he inquired softly. "What is it?" She looked up and blinked. "That's the place I saw in my dream," she replied. "I mean, not dream. I was hiding." "Hiding?" Amara nodded, looking serious all of a sudden. "I followed the automobile when it drove away. I know I shouldn't have. But I ran after it till my legs hurt. Then I stopped close to this large facility that smelled like tires and something sour." Miles leaned in. "Do you remember where it was?" "I don't know what it's called. There were, however, these tall metal structures, and this noise, like humming. I saw them bring Dwayne inside. Then the door slammed shut. I was afraid and rushed back." "That's the place," she said, pointing to the paper. Miles stared at it. The jagged square was the insignia for a loading port. Preston Industries had surreptitiously bought the logistics facility 6 months earlier on the city's industrial edge. There were no signs, no cars on the road. There is no activity on Google Maps. On paper, the warehouse was inactive. But Amara had seen it, and that changed everything. He looked at his crew. "I want people to see that building in the next hour. Drones. Scans of heat. Footage from the street. Please tell me if it breathes," Amara said as she pulled on his sleeve. "You're going to find him, right?" Miles knelt next to her and put a hand on her shoulder. "I promise, Amara. We're bringing your brother home." This time, it wasn't just a promise, it was a declaration. A little girl had done what technology couldn't. She remembered what the world wanted her to forget. That memory was the key to blowing the whole operation wide open. The warehouse looked empty, no sign, no logo, no movement. There were only rusty gates, piles of old pallets, and one weak light buzzing over a steel door. You would drive right past it without ever thinking about it. But Miles and his team were looking. Thermal drones flew quietly above. Inside, there were 5 heat signatures moving. 4 grown-ups. 1 little, sitting down. Still, it had to be Dwayne. Miles didn't wait for the cops to become involved. He worked with a reliable FBI contact who owed him a favor from years before. He felt like time was running out, and he knew the clock was almost up. A tactical force surrounded the property in 30 minutes, without making a sound or using sirens. Miles stood outside the perimeter with an earpiece in and his teeth clenched. All he had were radios, boots, and orders. Then the command came. Go. The team broke through the west door with smoke and flashbangs that were meant to confuse, not hurt. The suspects were surprised. None of them thought anyone would come looking for them. They weren't hitmen. They were just cowards who were hired to scare people and then go. Now they were face down on the floor. Dwayne's wrists were taped up in a rear room. His hoodie was dirty, his face was pale, but his eyes were open. Target located. The voice crackled in Miles' earpiece. He exhaled, and the breath shook in his chest. A medic rushed in to check on Dwayne, who flinched at first but then fell into the woman's arms. "He's okay," she said. Miles didn't wait. He went through the yellow tape and the perimeter lines and entered the building he wasn't authorized to. When Dwayne saw him, he froze. "You're the person from the TV," he said quietly. Miles crouched down carefully. "No, kid. Right now, I'm just a person who told your sister I would bring you back." Dwayne's chin shook. "Did you find me?" "I never stopped looking." The youngster broke down in his arms. The FBI agents took the suspects out behind them, hands cuffed and faces down. Finally, backup sirens could be heard in the distance. The real world was catching up, but for now, in that broken-down warehouse, a boy had been saved, not by chance. Not because of the system, but because someone finally thought his life was worth fighting for. It all started with one headline. Billionaire CEO personally rescues kidnapped teen from abandoned warehouse. But that wasn't the whole story. Not really. The real headlines started to come out within hours. Police ignored black teen's abduction until a billionaire stepped in. Dwayne's story sparks national outcry over missing black youth, and how one little girl shamed a city into listening. And just like that, the media woke up. Networks that had previously scrolled past missing black children's faces on police blotters now aired Dwayne's photo on the hour. Marlene was asked to speak on talk shows, but her voice was unsteady and her sentences were rough. Number justice for Dwayne, number black boys matter, and number we are not invisible were all over the place. For once, people spoke up. Preston Industries tried to spin it. Not accepting, not connected. We didn't know of any illegal activities happening in properties owned by third-party subsidiaries, but it was too late. The records that Miles's team disclosed showed that this was not the case. Payments, messages, hush money. It wasn't just carelessness, it was a cover-up. The pressure from the public grew quickly. The prices of stocks fell. The board of Preston's company stayed away. Charles Preston was under federal investigation and facing civil suits that were piling up like bricks by the end of the week. Miles, on the other hand, wasn't celebrating. He didn't want applause, he wanted accountability. So he stood behind a podium, not at a corporate press conference, but at a candlelight vigil in Holloway Park, the same park where Dwayne had last been seen. Hundreds of people showed up, moms and dads, teachers, teenagers who looked just like Dwayne. News teams were there. But the moment was silent. Miles said bluntly, "I shouldn't have had to be a billionaire for Dwayne to be found." There was a pause. And Amara shouldn't have had to burst into a luxury restaurant for anyone to care. He looked out at the throng and said, "This wasn't a rescue story. This was a reminder that too many people don't listen to what they have to say until someone important does. We're going to change that. Today." The crowd cheered, but Miles didn't smile. He looked through the crowd for one face, and there she was, Amara. She was wearing a pink jacket that was too big for her, and her smile was just as bright as the daisy she had given him. He nodded. The media had finally found her. The world had finally listened. But for Miles, it wasn't about being seen anymore. It was about making sure no one else had to scream into silence again. Things slowly went back to normal after that. Dwayne was home, safe, yet silent and yet thinking, but surrounded by affection. Amara was back to normal, asking 100 questions an hour and laughing too loudly in areas that used to be peaceful. But something had changed. Not just in their family, in Miles. He sat one evening in the same rooftop cafe where it all began, the same table, same point of view. But this time, the air felt different. Not because the city changed, but he had. Before all of this, Miles thought his job was to make things, like companies, products, and money. Now he understood better. His real duty was to witness the folks the world passed by. The headlines didn't mention the kids. The mothers were buried in the back kitchens. Maps didn't show the neighborhoods unless they burned. Amara taught him that courage isn't just standing up to danger. Sometimes it's just choosing to notice someone the world has made invisible and deciding their life is worth living. Geneva reminded him of this, and Dwayne proved it by surviving. Miles started a new organization called the Amara Initiative, which focuses on finding missing children of color, funding community safety technology, and helping families who have been let down by the system with legal issues. Not for show, not for the press. But one little girl had the guts to run into a place she wasn't meant to be in, and the whole world stopped and listened. So what's the true lesson here? This is what it means. Being seen is power. And courage is what makes that power work. You don't have to be affluent. You don't have to be well known. Sometimes, all it takes is seeing someone that others don't, and choosing not to look away. If this story touched you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Hidden Worth. Here, we don't just tell stories, we amplify the ones that were never meant to be forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be the reason someone else gets seen.